Welcome to the PahRooZings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Welcome to another installment of PahRooZings, The Power of Values. We are so excited today to be with Heather Sullivan, an amazing, overly optimistic, puts the sunshine in the day professional, and really has been involved in some fascinating opportunities in the industry. And even more interesting is her path to where she's gotten to. One of the benefits we have of being able to talk to a wide range of individuals is there's no one way to get in the profession, there's no one way to be in the profession, and there's no one way to advance in the profession. So we hope through today's conversation, much like each of the preceding ones, that you get some perspective on maybe some new opportunities or a new path, or from where you're at now to where you're going in the future. So with that, we're excited to kick it off. Heather, welcome.
Well, hello, Michael. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
We are excited to have you. Thank you for accepting the invitation. They don't get passed out often, and they're very sparse, but for those that do, we are thrilled that you're part of this selection. So thank you, and we are excited not only to have you here, but we really appreciate so much about what you've accomplished and what you're working on. And I think even more interesting that is how you got into the industry. So were you born into the industry, or did you get an on-ramp at some other point in life?
I was not born into the industry.
High five, one other person not born into the industry.
I actually got my start in college. I had no idea about the appraisal profession. I was a finance major and just going down that path, and happened to meet someone that was in the industry that needed a little help, not as an appraiser trainee or an appraiser, but just entering data in the office, setting up files, scheduling appointments. This was back in the days of 1 hour photos. So taking the photos to 1 hour photo and sitting around waiting or pulling data out of the county assessor's office. So I did a lot of road work and just helping around the office to get me started. But that was really my insight into the industry. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. You get to go inside people's houses and, oh, there's a way of valuing it. It was just from there on, I was enthralled with it.
Well, many people who've been in the industry for any amount of time can relate to the 1 hour photos, are actually going to a place, like a physical place, as opposed to the internet, and having to talk to someone else and request information, and that whole people to people skills as opposed to, people to internet kind of experience.
I spent a lot of time down at the county assessor's office. The 25-cent per page copies of things, and you'd have the old Xerox machine where it was an all event. That's for sure.
You become good friends with those people. They're like, can I get another roll of quarters, please?
Even with mailing, we'd have to print each of the appraisals and then we'd package them to go. So I went to the post office. I'd actually hand deliver some of the appraisals right to our clients.
Oh my goodness. I love that.
It was very hands-on.
That's phenomenal. And what geography were you in when you first started out? And because you came about this by working with someone else who was in the profession, and you weren't even looking so much to work in the profession as much as they needed some help. You were looking for employment, and it just happened that it was an appraisal professional.
Yeah. So I was a University of Idaho student. So in Moscow, Idaho, again, a finance major. So I was just not even realizing it was related. I think it was actually an Appraisal Institute course I was taking for when I eventually started to log my hours and signed up as a trainee and started that process. I took an Appraisal Institute course. It was like an advanced income capitalization course. And I remember I'd been taking all these finance classes and had no correlation or understood the relevance or even context of what all these equations and different methodologies and practices I was using, how they even applied. And I went and took this course, and it was kind of like my aha moment where it was like, income capitalization, this is the same equation I was using over here and have no idea. And so it was really awesome to kind of go through that process. And prior to that, I was trying to figure out where I would ever use this stuff that I was learning in college. And I was luckily able to get that understanding before I left college, where I started realizing the importance of what I was learning. So very impactful.
It's always nice when at some point in the future, be it a month, a year, or 10 years, you're like, oh my gosh, I actually studied something in college that I can actually use, as opposed to just pass the test.
Oh, now I wish I would have held on to all my, well, I don't even know if you need to hold on to books anymore with the internet, but even some of the Excel spreadsheets that I developed with simulations and regression and all of that, I wish I would have kept some of that.
I've had the similar experience. I was like, wow, I actually wish I would have liked my stats teacher more. I mean, it would have been so useful at this point in my life and through much of my time in the profession, but all I wanted to do was just pass that class and get out of it. Wow. So you get this opportunity, you get an entry or exposure, if you will, into the industry. How long were you there, and what were some of the highlights of that experience?
By the time I graduated college, I also had my appraisal license.
Woohoo!
I know, it's pretty cool, actually. I didn't know
very cool.
the value of it.
That's very cool.
All my friends were graduating and they're all like, I got to find a job. And I already had a really solid job and career path ahead of me. So it was pretty exciting. But yeah, I did it all throughout college. And I think looking back, one of the experiences that I wasn't technically a part of, but my mentor or supervisor, she was a professor at the university, and she had, through the university, got a grant from the Department of Transportation. And they were basically with students in the class building what was probably one of the first ABMs, where it was all about intimate debating and the impacts of traffic flow and widening the street had on property values, and creating basically an automated valuation model that would capture the impacts of increasing traffic flows or widening the street. And it was pretty ironic now looking back, because data wasn't so accessible. So they actually sent all the students out across the state to measure the distance from the door to the middle of the street to kind of get that gauge of how close it was to. Now in this day, you can just go on Google Earth and
of course,
simulation and figure it out. But back then it was all of this was manually collected, and a lot of the MLSs weren't online or connected. So you had to go through and do it at every location. So just to think back of the manpower it took to develop that, it's so impressive, more impressive every day.
Great. And what a foreshadowing of opportunities, given what you got exposed to there as a university student.
Well, and again, I wasn't one of the students that was part of that project. But what was cool about working in the office is they had built the AVM, and I got to, as I was doing local appraisals and learning the ropes of my role, I would be able to plug the property into that AVM and see how close I was. So it was kind of like seeing if it lined up. I was more of a tester, I guess.
I get it.
But just seeing the process and being able to hear those conversations that were going around, and how they were thinking through it and everything, it really opened my eyes to how appraisals, the analysis piece of the appraisal process and things to consider and dominant characteristics and all that, it kind of gave me, I think, a better understanding of how those play into things.
What a wonderful exposure very early on, both in your professional career and specifically in this industry, to what data science looks like. I think, personal opinion, but if more people had that opportunity to have that type of entry into this industry and really understand this is all data science, it's not just, if residential, like picking 3 properties close by. It changes, as you said, it frames your whole thinking about valuation in a much larger context with much greater depth than, oh yeah, just trained somebody to go measure the house and pick 3 things close by that look like it. You're like, yeah, no, that's not really it.
Yeah. And the more I think about, even you touched on something that I've been putting a lot of thought in today, because, we did the 3 sales, or maybe 6 sales.
Oh, 6.
Yeah. We've always used this limited data set. And I personally think that's because it was hard to collect the data. Just even 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was hard. And so it was hard for the appraiser to really do large data sets and consider an extensive amount of information, because for one, it just wasn't available. It wasn't in some sort of consumable data source or anything like that.
Yeah,
It was all material.
exactly.
But now it's like we should be considering a lot more data. And it's I find it kind of ironic that we're still on 3 comparable sales and like there's so much more data out there if we just employed it and got past some of we used to do it this way and that's why we do it today.
Yes.
More towards, hey, there's a lot more we can do. We can get a lot more exact. It's kind of cool. I don't know.
Well, and I think well, you talk about like the cool factor. When we look at the capabilities today of what you can do with access to data, and it's not just about pick a value of a property, it's literally discuss trends, forecasting. It's about, extrapolating. I mean, there's so many different ways to use information in a meaningful capacity that's more than just a value of a single property. And as you touch on, when you start to get into that realm, suddenly there's a whole different set of users of information that would love to have access to it if they knew people were providing it. But if someone's like, oh, hey, here, I got my little picker, it picks up 3 comps and it drops in over there. Or even if it's commercial, it's like, oh, I grab my 5 little comps out of the database and I'm done. That's still very much needed. But there's so many more users of data and they're looking for people who can analyze it. They're looking for data scientists.
I took a wine. I was doing a lot of high dollar, overseeing the process for high dollar assignments that were in like Napa Valley and things like that. And I wanted to get a better understanding of like hobby farm versus and all of that. And I remember I took a class that was phenomenal where we actually went out to some of the vineyards and got to talk to, I don't even know the name anymore.
The vintners, like the actual
like who designs the vineyards and what grapes grow best and all of that. And there was such a science behind like even the weather patterns and the wind, how the wind, crossed the land and all this kind of stuff that I was thinking as an appraiser, that's important when somebody's buying, but do we capture that in our appraisal assignments? Like, do we understand really why they picked this location or versus, hey, it's got 12 acres that are, suitable for vineyard. It's like there's more to it. There's a lot more granular level that goes into the science behind making wine that actually impacts their decision of buying or selling. Again, I think there's so much more information available to us today that I would love to see us start expanding into more granular level that I think we would find that there's a lot of things we've never thought about that are influencing buyers' decisions.
Fascinating and important point, just as you touched on, and why you should clearly take a wine tour when you're in Napa. Because how can you begin to appraise any property if you haven't tasted the wine? I mean, if the wine's not good, can't be worth much.
I'm telling you, any CE class where you get to do wine tasting, it's a winner, guys. I would strongly recommend it.
Oh, that is funny. That is too much fun. So how long did you stay there in and around your university in Idaho before you had a next opportunity?
So when I graduated from college, I actually took a job over in the Seattle area. My husband also graduated at the same time, and he was doing work in the Seattle area. It's just a natural progression.
Oh, fantastic.
And that's when not knowing anything, I sent out applications. I heard the word underwriter and
oh, sure.
I can be an underwriter. So I sent out an application, got the call like, well, I don't think you're right for an underwriter, but we do have this reviewer position open. So I actually went from being an appraiser in the field to a reviewer pretty early on in my career.
Oh, wow. That's not as typical to be able to go from the field side to being over on more of the call to client side, at least, as you refer to it from a review standpoint. Were you with a lender or were you with an entity, like an organization?
I was with a lender at the time, a mortgage company.
And what was that like?
It was fascinating. So you got to realize I think I took the job with them in 2003. It was a subprime lender.
Oh man, things were phenomenal in 2003 for us. I mean, there was so much opportunity. I mean, everywhere you turned around, it was like, there's another 4-leaf clover.
It was just one of those, like being a college graduate where you'd heard you're going to make this amount of money and you got to work your way up and all this stuff. I feel like I just jumped right in and the money, the atmosphere, everything. It was kind of
what they call it the go-go times, right? It was just, and And you're in Seattle. I mean, that was a hot time, and not that Seattle hasn't stayed very strong through all these years, but oh my goodness, I can't imagine all the things you must have seen.
I'm not surprised that it went under, but we were having, our Christmas parties at the top of the Space Needle and things like that. So
The rest of us could be so fortunate to be partying at the top of the Space Needle.
definitely some good times.
Wow. So did you stay with that particular employer up through, as we know, there was a little hiccup in the economy. Were you there up through that time, or did you change before then, or how'd it go?
So interesting enough, we were one of the first ones to kind of falter and go under. And I remember it's a long story, but an accounting principle changed on how you declared your debt, so anyway, we went from the top of the world on one day, and the next day credit lines were getting pulled. And because we were one of the first, if not the first one, they sent us all home, and we were assuming that we would get purchased. So the company probably wasn't doing the most righteous thing. It was one of those things. I loved working there. I definitely waited it out to see if somebody was going to buy the company. And then
Yes.
the day that we got notified, which was about 3 months later, we'd all been sitting at home for about 3 months. And
You were an early adopter of remote work, is what you're telling us.
well, we weren't working.
Oh, that's even better. You're getting paid to stay at home. People, hey, where can they sign up for that job, Heather?
Yeah, we got sent home. So this was like, you got to realize these were like good times. So we got sent home. They thought we were going to get purchased. We were getting full bonuses while we sat.
Oh my gosh, can I apply for that job?
I know. So that's where I was like, all right, I'm going to go down with this ship if I have to. And so literally the day that they all pulled us together for a conference call saying, look, nobody's buying us. We're done. We're closing the doors. I got a phone call literally leaving that meeting. It wasn't, we went to the office for that. When I was driving away from the meeting, I got a call from my next job. It was like, all right.
Oh my gosh, what beautiful serendipity.
Unemployed for about a half a second.
I think most people would have to master an art. Like, how do you stay unemployed for the least amount of time?
I mean, couldn't have been better. So
Wow. So were you still, did you basically complete your time there in review capacity, or did you move on to other responsibilities while you were there before they fell on hard times?
I was a reviewer for the full time I was there. And then when I took on the next role, I started as a reviewer as well for super jumbo loans.
Oh, okay.
And there, I was promoted to a regional chief appraiser that more oversaw process. And then it went into various manager roles and things like that.
Yeah. So you went from being more of a staff reviewer into an RCA role. That's what I hear you saying.
Yep.
So you never moved too far away from wine early on, I hear, staying in the jumbo properties. You're like, me. Was it white wine or red wine? Like, which properties were worth more?
I still don't even know the answer to that, because I think, what it depends on is what grapes grow best.
That is true.
Grow different grapes.
That is all the more reason to take that important consumption class for CE. That is definitely the case.
Get in multiple locations.
Oh, yes. That's good. That's really good. So from those that are not familiar with the experiences of being a reviewer or what it means to be a regional chief appraiser and then moving up to other levels, how do the responsibilities change in terms of the work that you're handling or the assignments that you're involved in or the client relationships?
I loved being a reviewer. It was such a insightful role for me. I had a fantastic supervisor and mentor that showed me how to do everything, right? It was by the books. I learned a tremendous amount, but it wasn't until I got to reviewing and working more for the lender client behind the scenes kind of a role that I really understood why we do what we do. Why are they asking for this? Why do they need that? What does this mean? So it was like very much a learning experience for me where I finally start to understand how all the pieces come together. And I always tell people, like, if I would have realized that all of that when I was out in the field, I would have been such a better appraiser, because I was one in a rural area. It's like, if I had better comps, I would have gave them to you. I'm holding on to that perfect comp for when you ask for it type of a thing, instead of trying to understand why do they need that additional comp? What are they trying to solve for by asking that? And so it was just because of that experience not only did I understand the process better, but I could also, in reviewing somebody else's work, in order to go back to someone and say, hey, I want you to consider this additional information, I had to know that I wasn't wasting their time, that I wasn't asking for something that wasn't either available or relevant. And so I would do so much research to make sure that the information I was giving to them was significant to the appraisal and the results of the appraisal. And so it just, in all, I think that was my biggest time of growth as an appraiser. When I got more into the management roles and things like that, it was from that learning experience that I think propelled me to that level and then also helped me make better decisions. But after that, it was more managing the process or other appraisers.
You had that ground up experience, what I heard you say about getting to work in this case for someone who was actually a professor, also had appraisal business, if you will, or appraisal activities, and then moving into a review capacity and then getting promoted, taking on additional responsibilities that oversaw the review process. And then what's it like to move from being not just a reviewer, but a regional chief appraiser into management? Because are you still touching appraisals at that point? Or do you have wistful memories of like, oh, that's what it's like to be in the field. And here I am stuck in a cube farm. I mean, like, what's it like in that next role?
It's definitely different because now you're not the one producing the appraisals or the appraisal reviews. You're now more responsible about or how many appraisals get produced or what is the quality of everybody else's work and keeping them on task. And so it was definitely a change, responsibilities and day-to-day activities. You're still kind of involved as that escalation. So if there's a complex assignment or unique situation or challenging situation, you're still that subject matter expert or that sounding board for your team, but you're not as you more are dealing with the problems than the rest of appraising. So very rewarding, definitely a natural next step for most. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed voice throws.
And I would imagine for some people, I mean, a lot of it's about the opportunity to move in a direction of employment responsibilities that naturally fit your talents. And having the opportunity to get to know you over a period of time, like that naturally fits into what you are good at. And so being able to progress in that capacity, probably, I would naturally assume, just provided you even more fulfillment.
Absolutely. One of the things that I had a range of different roles. I oversaw a review team for reverse mortgage, which is a very different product.
Yeah, that's different.
And very different than super jumbo assignments. And so I did get kind of a large perspective on the various types of not just properties and conditions and quality and all of that, but also the different, when you get into jumbo and super, and jumbo is more portfolio loans versus origination. And there's a lot of correspondence and it was interesting how each role was first. Usually it was for a specific division or product line. And so you got very detailed and knowledgeable about one specific thing. And then when you transferred to a new one, it was like, okay, I need a different set of skills to understand this from an appraisal perspective.
That's fascinating. So did you stay with that employer kind of riding out the crash and then continued on for a period of time? Or how did your experience and employment in the appraisal profession continue? Because you never left it from then till now.
Yeah, you did say that. So this was the time of consolidations and buyouts and everything. So I started with Countrywide originally.
Oh, okay.
I think I was only there about that. So the job I took the day that New Century closed was Countrywide. And I think I was there for about a month before Bank of America bought Countrywide.
So you got new business cards.
So I got new business cards. I got a new office space. And then it was a few years later that subsidiary, or what you want to call it, was LandSafe.
Yes.
So it was like once Bank of America took control over it, then CoreLogic purchased LandSafe from Bank of America. So I went to the CoreLogic then.
More business cards.
Like I said, I was one of the constants, but I did that. I think I was with Countrywide, Bank of America, CoreLogic for about 15 years.
Oh, wow. So you got to see a lot of continuity, but also a lot of change in the process.
Lots of change. Well, and it would just even with the time. So, everybody's responding to the changes in markets and
Yes.
what all of our business is so tied to the economy and everything. So we definitely ebbed and flowed with everything else in the world.
Well, that is definitely the case. And you got to be employed with large employers through a series of some big cycles and some small cycles. Have a different vantage point, if you will, over the machinations that are happening down in the trenches.
Yeah, I tell you, it was fascinating to see that side of things, and even the change from Bank of America to CoreLogic, where CoreLogic's more of a technology company, data analytics. Yeah, it was interesting.
And what, having that interesting opportunity to see and experience the difference between, say, a lender that's fulfilling a role in the process versus an analytics company who's contributing to helping the industry do what needs to get done. What perspectives did you gain around more of the analytics and the technology as opposed to just a lender who has an appraisal subsidiary?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's a lot of different things because they just operate completely different. Because as a subsidiary to the lender, we're more production, appraisal centric service to the larger organization versus when we're separate from that, we're more of a business needing to be self-sustained and we're the product being sold, if that makes sense. So
That makes sense.
It's two different dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a lot of fun to change gears and be more a product that you can improve upon and change. And there's value in making enhancements and thinking outside the box and making things more efficient and incorporating more into it. It was a lot of fun to see that side of things and just what appraisals could be and how it connects with everything else.
That's a fascinating perspective to gain where most people don't get the opportunity as your career path provided, which is to see hey, wow, here's some different ways we can do processes that were going on. Here's some different valuable deliveries we can provide to clients that they want to pay for if we're willing or capable of developing it, which, it starts with, yes, there's someone who needs valuation on a property, but that doesn't necessarily always directly translate into what the client ultimately has so many more responsibilities for. What are one or two interesting projects you got to work on?
I think for me personally, so when CoreLogic bought LandSafe, they also purchased the Columbia Institute.
Oh, yeah.
I'd already started or Bank of America internally, I'd already started developing training. I was in the high dollar space, and it was one of those things where there was a need for training for these very complex, very unusual properties, sometimes one of a kind, like in the state and the country.
Sure.
We're talking, the most limited data available for analysis and everything. So there was this need for training for that. And you can't, with appraiser independence and all of that, you can't coach somebody through the assignment. So it's we started thinking through like, what kind of training could we provide up front to help them with quoting and completing the assignment, identifying the problem to be solved, and really some of the more creative ways of applying some of those theories and methodologies that we use in, a standard appraisal. But now, because data is so limited, we've got to get a little bit creative. We got to go way back in time, or we've got to
yes,
think outside the box as far as location and really, if you could buy anywhere in the United States and you're looking for this type of property, you're not just going to look at this one area. You might look 4 states away. And so it was one of those things where we started building this training internally. But the challenge is we're asking everybody to take it if they might get 1 or 2 assignments from us, because it's not like there's a lot of high dollar assignments and everything.
You're going to get $700 million homes this year. Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah. So it was one of those things where it's like, we were building this education. It was fantastic. But when they purchased Columbia Institute, it was like, maybe I can get some CE credit for this. And then that would be like a win-win, because they can get CE credit and we can deliver the training that we felt was helpful to them in performing their day-to-day. So when the Columbia Institute came into play, I was like, I got to talk to them.
Oh, you had an eye on something is what I think.
Yeah, so they were putting on a instructor development workshop, and honestly, I had no formal training and all of that. So I asked if I could attend, and that's kind of the rest is history after that.
That's fantastic. So you made another career shift within your employer. One of the benefits of being involved with a larger employer is you can move around you can move with a much greater span and still stay under that same name on the business card.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I took over leadership of the Columbia Institute.
Oh, that's impressive.
Ended up running their content development operations, and it was a fun career change because it was so different. I had to, go and get my USPAP instructor certification designation. I had to think about state licensing and approval for courses, and really learning how adults learn and what that type of more formalized education piece looked like from a distributor of education. So it was completely different, but even
what a change.
Makes me a better appraiser, because now it's like, I got to be ready to answer all these questions. It's like, you have to, like when you're building content, you have to be like, all right, they're going to ask me this. So I have to, or even better yet, I know they're going to ask me this. How do I fit that into the training so they don't have to ask that? So it was, again, another just huge professional growth opportunity where I did a lot of self-reflection and gained a lot of knowledge on a whole nother level of the appraisal process and best practices and all that good stuff.
Fascinating. So for those that don't know Columbia Institute, I infer, because I can't say I was aware of them before you mentioned it, sounds like they were education provider, were regional or national?
They were a national education provider out of Texas. Yeah.
And then when you stepped in, was it more in the capacity to kind of just help them keep doing what they were doing, or did you expand the offerings, or did you bring in a lot of your background from the high value homes perspective, or did you create whole new curriculum?
So we expanded our footprint. So I guess when we first purchased Columbia Institute, it was more of a regional provider. We expanded into online content. They put on the Appraisal Summit for a number of years, I think 12, 13 years. They were of the Appraisal Summit with the National Association of Appraisers.
Yes.
Pretty awesome. This was when I feel like prior to that, I was still kind of siloed, and I stayed in my lane and really didn't. This was another one of those eye openers where I now gain this industry perspective of interacting with industry leaders that are influencing policy and procedures and practices, making all the different rules and regulations that appraisers adhere to every day. And so I was starting to understand more of that piece of the appraisal profession.
Yes.
And I found it absolutely fascinating, because this is when you start getting into state regulators and the Appraisal Foundation and heads of the industry like Fannie and Freddie, and being able to be in the same room and listen to their insights and the problems that they're seeing or dealing with. It was for the first time I actually really felt connected to the industry as a whole, where I was still before that kind of, okay, this is my company and I know everybody in the company, and I know what's, how the company operates and, what they're thinking, but I still didn't have that piece of even beyond that, where it's like, okay, this is why the company's making these changes. It's because up here, somebody else is making this change, or, wanting to go in this direction. So now I finally feel like, all right, I know where we're headed and why we're headed there and who's going to be making that decision and get us there. And I don't know, it's just a lot of fun to see all these parts keep coming together. And I'm sure there's even more layers that I'm not familiar with, but
that's an amazing experience, as you said, to continue to grow and advance, get exposure to a whole different level of the industry, as well as moving at a point in time from being someone who's in the industry to being someone who's sitting in the room, having conversations around the very rules, regulations, changes that are going to go back and influence that one individual sitting maybe in Idaho.
I mean, I strongly encourage anybody in the profession, start connecting with your local organizations, start going to some of these conferences or in-person CE classes where, you can make these connections. Because I learned so much from just listening to others speak about how they're thinking through things or how they're approaching some of these appraisal problems that we're facing, even on an individual assignment, just knowing the appraisers in your market where you can reach out to them and say, how are you dealing with this? Or are you getting the same type of thing? We just, as a profession, we're still very disconnected. And there's so much value in working together and kind of unifying that, especially with, everything that's going on in the industry.
I completely agree. And as you touch on we have more ability now than ever before to connect with others in the industry, our peers, if you will. And sadly, it seems like we're as disconnected as we've ever been.
I think we're more exposed as to how disconnected we are.
Maybe that's what
More
it is.
disconnected. I mean, we're just more exposed. And
Wow.
yeah, that's unfortunate because we've got some amazing appraisers.
Speaking of your work there at Columbia Institute, what accomplishment were you most proud of that you either contributed to, participated in, or created?
I think there was a lot of wins because I got a lot of, just on different levels, both personally or as an organization. Our ability to expand and grow the Appraisal Summit was always, I saw year-over-year growth in that. From a personal perspective, like if I wrote course content and I would also teach the courses or watch others teach the course. And it was always so rewarding when somebody would say something to the effect of, where was this 20 years ago? Or how come I didn't know this? Or, you could just see that light bulb going off and getting really excited about this is going to, solve so many of my problems type of a thing. So I got a lot of personal satisfaction out of seeing how I was having an impact on others and their day-to-day. Going on, I think one of our biggest accomplishments was, when COVID hit, just completely rethinking our organization and our delivery. We were, for the most part, prior to that, all in person. And we had to change within a matter of instant from being all remote and on-site education to completely virtual, which, in hindsight, it was really good for the business and why we're not seeing everything revert back to in person. There's a lot of value and convenience in virtual and online education. And I think it's kind of the best of both worlds where you have that interaction, but you have the convenience of online. So I think that was probably our biggest accomplishment, is being able to take what we've been working on for the last year in preparation, just being throw it all away, let's start over. And we need it tomorrow type of thing.
Is yesterday soon enough? You're like, oh, I'm so glad you asked. I just happen to have it right here in my drawer. Let me just pull it right out and give it to you.
And that was painstaking because at the time, approvals, you had to approve each course for each delivery method. So you an approval for in-person versus virtual versus online. And the states were adapting to the news and the stay-at-home orders all differently. So some states are like, yeah, go ahead and teach that in-person class online. And another are like, no, you can't do that. And so it was just trying to navigate that all was, we lost some sleep over that for sure.
I imagine so. And you, by your earlier answer, you said you were there for 15 years, which implies that you left there and went somewhere else.
Yeah, earlier this year, I started with a loft appraisal. So,
okay.
A startup appraisal firm out of Seattle.
Wow. So it's you and one professor who does appraisal, and you're out there going to the offices again and checking with the assessor and doing 25-cent copies?
Not at all.
Not at all. Oh my goodness.
We have our own technology team and they're building process flows and tools and software for us. It's incredible. It's
amazing
cool to be a part of. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what's your role there at this new employer?
So I head up their learning and development. So I'm heading operations training programs.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a large trainee population. And so I get to do onboarding and trainee boot camp and trainee development. And I do with obviously continuing education and stuff like that for appraisers. But
yes,
a lot of my first year is spent with trainee development.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, something the industry greatly needs. It sounds like you're at the intersection of education and growing the very population of professionals that's needed to ensure that the public gets served by those that are skilled to do it.
And they're an impressive bunch. Like, that was kind of one of the driving factors to my decision. I
See.
to teach a class there, and when I got there, there was a trainee. I didn't know he was a trainee at the time.
Yeah.
Incredible, like, adjustment calculator that was all built into the program that I kind of automated it, used regression and all this stuff. And it was graphs and charts. And it was just fantastic.
I see.
And he was showing all the other appraisers and trainees in the office how to use it, and, how to manipulate it and understand the outputs of it. And it was just like that breath of fresh air where you're like, this is what it's supposed to be about. We're supposed to be collaborating. We're supposed to be, when you think about your scope of work, it's like, what would your peers be doing? If we don't know what our peers are doing, then we can't establish an effective scope of work. And so it was just that whole thing of seeing them in action. And even that day when I was teaching the class, I couldn't tell who was a trainee and who was an appraiser. They were all asking such great questions. It just blew me away. So it made me realize how much I missed that aspect of it, that collaboration, that building each other up and sharing. And we've kind of gotten to more of a competitive, everybody for themselves type of mindset. And it was refreshing. It's really cool to see. And so we've expanded on that. It was there before I got there, but we continue to grow on that. And, we're doing a lot more of focus on collaboration, and it's a lot of fun.
I can really hear the excitement in your voice, just in the way you answered and describe what you're doing there, that sense of newness and freshness and engagement. I hear all of that. What is one or two, in general terms, initiatives that you're most excited to be working on right now?
We've got two initiatives that I feel like are game changers and something the industry's needed for a while. We're doing an internal badging program that helps us identify specialization. So often it's like, I'm a licensed appraiser, but it doesn't say I prefer to do this, or I really am extremely good at this.
Yes.
Might not be one of my strengths, but I can do it. It's like we don't have that differentiation. And so we're building a program that helps us not just identify everybody's strengths and growth opportunities, but also providing the training. And other companies I've worked at, like you come in as appraiser and it's like, this is your skill. And then as they realize you can't do something, they just start taking away things from you. There's no let me help you build up this skill, or here's the tools. It's more like, you just start slowly getting things taken away from you of what you're capable of producing. And so I really love this opportunity of, let's identify where your strength, weaknesses, or growth opportunities might be, and let's provide that training that you need to actually turn that from a weakness into a specialization. And so we're actually very much developing training that's hands-on, very specific to all the different complexities within an appraisal, and formulating a way of recognizing that within the organization. So it's a lot of fun to be a part of that.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And then you said there's a second project as well.
Well, just always the trainee program. We're working on really developing that next generation of appraiser that is technology driven and has all the various skills and proficiencies that we're kind of, we're seeing the industry shift to. And so building that training to help new potential appraisers come into the industry and making that process a little bit smoother.
Sure.
And collaborative, that's structured. I think one of the things we are challenged with in the industry today is just a solid structure around each trainee and how, they're trained. And so we're building that consistent structure that everybody will go through the same process. At the end of the day, we'll have a more consistent quality product to show for it.
That's impressive. I mean, clearly having worked through the many facets of the industry you've been in, you have seen, you didn't say this, but having been exposed to it and some of the places you've worked in the past, one of the most important things is quality, of course, but it's consistency in the quality.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing that more than ever just in this industry right now with various news articles coming out where two different appraisers coming in at two different answers.
Yes.
We've got to get more consistent as a profession. I mean, the reason I'm where I'm at today is because it's a controlled group that,
Yes.
we can all learn and train together and get on that same page. So within our organization, we'll have that consistency. But I would really love to see that expand beyond. And as a profession, we all recognize the importance of consistency in protecting public trust. And we work together to get on the same page and perform in a more consistent manner because we need to.
That is very true. And speaking of that, given that you're at this both exciting and interesting opportunity, as you said, it's a startup, but yet you're influencing a lot of people and from the corner of the world you're in. What are you most excited about over the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
I think I'm just excited about all the possibilities. I'm very much an optimistic, and I always hear the pessimistic side of things where, the sky is falling, but I think we have a ton of opportunities, and it's what I'm most excited about is trying to figure out which one, because we do them all. And I think there's so many. So it's like, which ones do we focus on and which ones have the most impact, either to the business or to the profession. But I look at this as, I know it's slowed down. We're all experiencing it, but I think this is a great time to reflect and kind of regroup and be like, we have a historic, amount of data that says this too will pass. And it's like, how do we just make sure we're prepared for when it does, we're able to capitalize on it? And I think those are kind of the things we're thinking through right now, how to obviously stay busy through a market slowness, but at the same time, how do you come out of it stronger than ever? And I think that's kind of the fun problem to have. I think there's endless amounts of opportunity and direction we can take this.
That's a very bright outlook on a future that not everyone shares. But then again, you have had the benefit of hard work and timing and ability to invest within yourself and contribute to others that allows you a very different perspective that says, hey, given all these things, here's a view of the future I have, and inviting other people to come along for that same perspective.
Our skills are very transferable. There's endless amounts of options and opportunities with the skills that we have to leverage them in different ways and apply them to different things. And real estate touches everything. It touches all lives and all businesses. And, there's just so much there that we haven't even thought of all the opportunities.
That's indeed the case. So given that there's a whole range of individuals, both in the industry as well as outside the industry, what are, if you will, reflecting on both your own experience as well as what you're seeing available now, what would be one or two suggestions for actions to take or things to consider for those individuals?
Yeah, for those thinking about coming in the industry, I would advise, start connecting with people that are in the industry, ask questions, get familiar with the processes. There's a lot, each state is operated differently. So kind of understanding your state rules and asking those questions that relate to how do I get in the industry? What kind of jobs are available to me in the industry? And then the second part I would do is, it's hard to navigate any profession and know, okay, when I see a job, is that a job for me, or is there a different name for it or a title? And I learned, just send your resume in,
Like you said, like, hey, I'm going to apply for this underwriter thing. Don't have any underwriter experience, but what the heck?
I feel like the most of the opportunities find you instead of you finding them. So just get your foot in the door and try to connect with as many people as you can, because those doors get opened all the time. And I never dreamed I would have been in this role or this position or in this aspect of well, even in appraising alone, I didn't even know what appraising was when I got into it. So
Heather, most people don't. That's the thing.
I know. So it's just one of those things where, don't limit yourself. Just start doing it. Just put your name out there.
Wonderful guidance there. And as you look back from when you first got exposed to the industry to now, what would you say was the either characteristic or talent or trait that most played in your favor?
I would say, I think having a positive outlook that just, to me, is one of those things where I don't know that I could live in a world where I didn't have that. I
don't think you could.
Really affected me. So I think my positive disposition, my ability to just kind of think out the side of the box and jump into action have always played, because I think most of the roles I took on was, hey, there's this thing that we should be thinking about, but not just telling them it's going to be a problem, but also, have you thought about this as a solution? And then obviously, here, that's a great solution. It's yours now. So I don't know how many times that's been my role, where you say, hey, we can do this better. And they're like, all right, go do it.
Thank you. You now own that. Go get it done.
Yeah, you got to make sure you're careful about what you bring up, because there's a good chance you'll be owning that. But I don't know. I always find that, if it's something you're passionate about, you got to let somebody know, because the chances are they'll let you do it. Because
Good point. Maybe a thought or two in closing. Obviously, we're in different economic times than many people in the industry, newer people, if you will, meaning in the last, say, 20 years, have traditionally lived through. What's your outlook over the next 18 to 36 months for the profession and for the individuals in the profession or considering it?
Everybody's heard the news, where we could be headed into a recession if we're not there already. We're dealing with inflation and higher interest rates, which are, kind of impeding the buying pool. So we're definitely seeing a slowdown. You're hearing about a slowdown. But, again, when one door closes, another one opens. So you just got to think through the cycle of things. We know with the last downturn, there was a spike in foreclosures and short sales and servicing assignments and government programs to help people during the tough times. I don't know if we'll see that, but that's definitely an option that, would be worthwhile to kind of make sure you understand that book of business. But then there's also, you hear everybody has these historically low interest rates, so they're not going to refinance, they're not going to sell, but people want change. So they're going to want to upgrade their house or add additions, so HELOCs and things like that might be becoming more popular. So again, that's a different type of loan program that you'll probably want to understand, maybe as is versus as repaired values and things of that nature. And then there's just, we were talking earlier about tax appraisal, and there's just some of those staples that are there regardless of the economy, and, being able to do estate planning, relocations, tax appraisal. There's just so many different avenues you can take appraising. And I think just balancing that out and figuring out how to get those other lines of business there, what everybody's doing. And then I also think, there's teaching, there's taking on a trainee is a great time. You have time to sit down with them and prepare them so that when times do pick up, because we know it's going to happen, you have this amazing resource to ramp up and expand when it starts flowing back in.
That is, as you touched on, a broad set of opportunities and a positive outlook indeed. We know that one's definitely there. Well, Heather, I am so grateful for the opportunity to just get a little time together and hear your experience, hear your trajectory, and also hear your outlook, because it's not one that many people get access to. And we hope that through this just easygoing and informative conversation that it maybe sparks some action or prompts some interest for others to take on. Look, you too could start as essentially a college student. Maybe it was a part-time job, and next thing you know, you're working for a funded startup and you're probably going to try and take on the world. So who knows what's possible?
Exactly. No, the possibilities are endless. I'm telling y'all, you can't go wrong. It's a great profession to be in. It's interesting. It's dynamic. It's always changing. You get so much flexibility. Just check it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, check it out. It can't hurt. Well, with that, I just want to say again, Heather, thank you so much. And thank you to each and everyone who's taken the time here to listen in on this podcast episode. We're grateful for Heather's contribution. And until the next one around the corner, keep your head up. As you heard Heather say, a positive outlook is much better than the alternative, and keep doing the great work. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of PahRooZings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of PahRooZings, Appraisers on Purpose. Create the change that you seek.